Hello friends, welcome to my channel. Now we are going to cover type of research. In them, experimental research. This is part 3 video of type of research. As you know, experimental research is one of the type of quantitative research. Let's go to cover this concept. Experimental research. What is experimental research? It means you have to perform some experiment. Okay, then experimental research is a scientific method. What is a scientific method? Experimental research is what? A scientific method used to determine cause and effect relationship between variables under controlled condition. Okay, but experimental research is the scientific method used to determine the cause and effect relationship, okay, between them, the variables. Okay, variables means here what we have to know it. Okay, don't worry, it establishes causal relationship. Okay, but experimental research, in experimental research there are a cause and effect relationship. It means causal relationship in them, in between variables. So what are the variables? First we have to know, yes or no? Okay, then characteristics. What are the characteristics of experimental research? The main characteristics, there are 3 main characteristics. That is, first controlled, then manipulation, then observation. First 3 you have to remember it. That is controlled, manipulation, then observation. Then next, an independent variable is manipulated. Which variable manipulated in experimental method? An independent variable. Okay, then all other variables except independent variable are held constant. Then which variables are held constant? Independent variable except all the whatever variables are there present. Okay, except the independent variables, all of the variables are what? Make constant. It means if the question comes in which method of research or in which type of research variables are controlled except the independent, experimental method. Okay, then all other variables except independent variable. Okay, remember it. Then the effect of manipulation. What? The effect of manipulation of the independent variables on the dependent variables is observed. Okay, then whatever effects are on dependent variables, that is observed by whom? That is independent variables. It means independent variables, when independent variables is manipulated, then whatever effect comes, that you have to observe on dependent variables. Then it uses control and experimental group. What? Control and experimental group. In which research method controlled and experimental groups are used? In experimental research. Okay, it ensures randomization and avoid bias. One of the most important thing, randomization in experimental method. Remember it, randomization, the term in which research it is covered, that is experimental method. Okay, maintain control over external variable. Okay, on which variables it maintain the control mostly, that is external variable. Okay, these are the characteristics. Just remember for conceptual questions. Okay, it will be more helpful for you. Then let's know what is variables before we say that is independent variable, dependent variables, okay, external variables. Then what are they exactly? Let's know. Independent variables, it is also known as treatment variable. It means manipulation is with what? Is with independent variables. That's why it is called treatment variables. Okay, an independent variable is the variable that the researcher manipulate to observe its effect on another variables. What? An independent variable is the variables that the researcher manipulate. Researcher what do? Manipulate. On which? That is independent variables. Then observe what? The effect on another variables. Then what are the another variables? Let's know. Then dependent variable. Dependent variable is what? It is the effect or response in an experiment. Okay. We know that the manipulation effect we observe from whom? That is dependent variables. So that it is called effect or response in an experiment. Okay. Then also known as a response variable. Obviously it can call response variable. Then variable that represent the outcome or result of the experiment. The main important conceptual question can come. Okay. Which variable represent the outcome or result of the experiment? Okay. Which variable? That is dependent variable. Okay. Then move to the next concept, that is intervening variable. Okay. There is one term, intervening variable. It is also known as mediator variables. Remember the terms. What are the synonyms used for the variables are? Then an intervening variable is a hidden or internal factor. An intervening variable is a hidden or internal factor that comes between the dependent and independent variable. Okay, what comes between independent and dependent variable? It means cause and effect. It comes between cause and effect. Cause means independent, effect means dependent. Okay. Then explaining how and why. What? Explaining how and why the experiment variables affect the dependent. Why and how the independent variables affect the dependent variables. Okay. It explains what? Just remember. Then it is a linking or mediating variable between cause and effect. It link the two variables, that why it is a linking or mediating variables. Okay, it named as it is. Then it lies between dependent and independent variable. It lies between whom? It lies between two variables, that is independent and dependent variable. If the question comes like on which two variables cover independent variable, that is independent and dependent variable. Okay, intervening variables is lies between when? Independent and dependent variable. Okay, then move to the next, constant variable. Constant variable means a constant variable is a factor that the researcher keep unchanged, control, eliminate, constant. You can use any of the term throughout the experiment to ensure that it doesn't influence the result. Okay, constant variable what say? That the researcher keep unchanged or controlled throughout the experiment. The variables that is controlled by the researcher throughout the research or the experiment, that's ensure but doesn't influence the result or outcomes. Okay, then it is control variable that remains same for all participant or group. It is remains same for all participation or group. Okay, then it protect the study for unwanted variation. Remember it protect the study from unwanted variation. The question comes on it on UGC NET as well as CUET PG. Okay, so then extraneous variable. Okay, what is extraneous variable? An extraneous variable is any uncontrolled irrelevant variable. Uncontrolled irrelevant variables, it means which variable doesn't controlled by the researcher, that may influence the dependent variables. It is called extraneous variable. Extraneous variable is the outside influence. What? It is an outside influence that can affect the result or experiment. Okay, then what is confounding variables? Confounding variables means if an extraneous variables, what? If an extraneous variables is not controlled. Okay, it means constant variable. What we know in constant variable, it means we have to control variables. Okay, then if an extraneous variable not if an extraneous variable what not controlled by the researcher, and it affect the independent variable, then it become confounding variables. Okay, when confounding variables become when extraneous variable become confounding variable, when it is not controlled by the researcher or it affect the independent variable. Okay, when an extraneous variable influence both independent and dependent variable, it become confounding variable. It affect both dependent and independent variable. Okay, it is one of the mix of variables that confound the relationship of them. Okay, remember this fact on confounding variable. Then next, mediator variable. What? Moderator variables. It refers to variable that strengthen or diminish or negate or alter. Okay, any of the term you can use it. Okay, the association or relationship between dependent and independent variables. It modify the relationship. What? It modify the relationship. Which variables modify the relationship between independent and dependent variable? That is moderator variable. Okay, it explain when or whom. It explain when or for whom the independent variables affect dependent variables. Okay, it lies outside the cause and effect chain. Okay, remember it. Which variables outside the cause and effect, and which variables affect, which variables is not controlled, which irrelevant variable is not controlled, that is extraneous variable, and which variable lies outside the cause and effect, that is moderator variables. Okay, these two important variables. Then you know dependent, independent, constant, confounding. Okay, those are the variables on it. Okay, then steps in experimental research. Okay, then first step means problems. Okay, first step means what? That is problems, identifying or defining the problems. Then formulating hypothesis. What? Formulating hypothesis. Then selecting variables. After selecting variables, then you have to what perform? Selecting experimental designing. What is experimental designing? We are going to know it. Okay, just wait. Sample and randomization. Randomization means no biasness come. Okay, then conducting the experiment. Then you have to conduct the experiment. After that, then collecting and analyzing data. Okay, then interpretation and conclusion. Okay, these are the steps of experimental research. Okay, then experimental design. What are the experimental designing? Experimental design is a systematic plan. What? Systematic plan used by a researcher to test a hypothesis by controlling variable and observing their effect. What? Experimental design is a systematic plan used by a researcher to test a hypothesis. Okay, to test a hypothesis and controlling the variables and observing their effect. That is the experimental design. It means the full plan. Okay, then it means how will I conduct my experiment to get valid and reliable result. Okay, then there are three types of experimental designing. First is pre-experimental, then true experimental, then quasi-experimental. Okay, let's know them. Classification of experimental design. Okay, true, quasi, then pre. Okay, it means pre, true, quasi, whatever. True experimental design cover three types. These three types, that is pre-test and post-test only, post-test only group, Solomon for group. Okay, then quasi-experimental cover these three, that is non-equivalent, time series, multiple time series. Then pre-experimental means it covers these three, that is one short com study, one group pre and post static groups. Just remember it, which designs are comes on which types. It will be enough to you. Okay, in connecting examinations. Okay, so these are our full cover of experimental research. Okay, then we will meet tomorrow next. Thank you for watching the video till the end. I will come with another new concept on research. Till then, keep learning and keep practicing. Thank you.